Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're here today to talk about this article called They Get What They Deserve, Interrogating CDL Experiences as Framed in a Quebec Alternative High School Context by Dana E. Salter. Now, I have to admit, I've never taught in one of these schools before, and I think some of you may have more experience. So please enlighten me as to your views on these slides, but I'll just try to give you my views and ask you a couple of questions as we go along here. Okay, so she starts off talking about these frames, how to frame this alternative school context. How does the fact that it's an alternative school, how does that affect critical digital literacy as well as just literacy in general? And some pretty telling points that she makes in this article. She says that she's going to build this frame with three pieces, I suppose. One, definition of alternative school context. So how do the teachers think about their school? How did the students see themselves? Maybe even the general public think about this. So they talked about identity crisis. What exactly? It sounds like even the teachers aren't quite sure what to make of the setting, right? One called it a dumping ground, which sounds really, really sad that for many reasons. So that's part of the problem. Also, just the nature of a Quebec educational landscape. Again, I don't know a lot about Quebec, other than I know that I guess there's French as well as English language spoken and taught there. And this last point, though, really resonated with me, this idea of a sloganization of inclusive education. So everybody likes to talk about being inclusive, and it seems to be something we all value, but in this case, it seems to be just kind of an empty slogan, right? And when you really get down to, well, is it inclusive or not, we find that it's not really all that inclusive at all. So that's just one piece of this frame she's building. She also talks about the problem with the English language arts curriculum. So she says in the outside the alternative school and the traditional Quebec schools, there's a very good English language arts program, very good digital literacy focus. It does a lot of the things that we value after reading this book, right? The idea of a social praxis view. But unfortunately, in this alternative school context, these things get repackaged simply in terms of what's going to help you get a job, right? So I think about this, instead of having students do quote unquote fun or enrichment sort of projects, it's all just focused on what can we do that's going to help you with your resume, right? Or the kid does this fantastic project with the comic projects or whatever, the digital stuff, but the only thing the teacher focuses in on is, well, maybe the stuff that you learn doing this project will equate to some kind of a point you can raise in a job interview, right? Something that will impress a potential employer. So basically everything is focused around getting these kids jobs when they get out of this high school, right? So for these reasons, Salter says that this definition of CDL, narrow and literacy as well, quote, narrows rather than expands literacy engagements for students. So I want to stop here and get your opinion on this. I don't know how many of you might have had experience in some kind of alternative school context, but just from what you've read so far, what do you agree that this is a narrowing definition, or is Salter simply wrong or exaggerating the situation? Okay, so moving on, I want to get at this title. These kids get what they deserve, which seems like a horrific thing to say, for anybody to say about kids, right? I mean, these are high school students. They're not that it would make any difference, but they're very young. You think they would be this kind of a rush to judgment, right? And we don't really know what they might have done to get into this into this alternative school. I assume some kind of behavior problem, some kind of trouble at school, but I don't know. But anyway, this tech support person, and the names have been changed, but Linda, quote unquote, there's this problem. These kids have all these old, crappy, broken down computers, and the teachers want to get these swapped out to make room for some better machines, and the tech support person is not being very helpful. Yada yada, policy, yada yada. Can't do anything. Hands are tied. I've sort of had to deal with this. Thankfully, not here. But Linda's attitude was that they've done wrong somehow. They, for whatever reason, couldn't or wouldn't conform to the expectations of that traditional school. So they just had to learn to accept the consequences of their actions. What an attitude to have, right? I guess she's not a teacher, but a tech support. So I think Salter is quite right to ask, okay, how do these preform, or what kind of preformed images do we have about these schools, and how does that affect the CDL? So then we got another definition of CDL by Doctor and Lewis. And I'm not sure, it seems like we might have talked about Doctor and Lewis before, but we have their definition again, if that's the case. So what is CDL? They define it as digitally mediated social practices that envision and frame literacy as a form of critical civic engagement so that students can read the linguistic, visual, and oral signs and symbols that inundate their lives, both public and private. And Salter wanted to emphasize a little bit more on the active part of this definition, right? But the key, I think, to this is it's about as far away from that job readiness model as you can get, right? You're not saying we're teaching you skills so that you can go out and join the workforce and be part of a system. Instead, there's that idea of civic engagement. So we're going to teach you these skills not just so you can go out and get a job and good employment, but actually try to make the world a better place, right? A more equal place, a more just place. So there's kind of a social justice angle to this that I personally appreciate. But unfortunately, I think Salter's all too correct that it doesn't seem to be. They have the best intentions, but it's not getting implemented this way in this alternative school. So I'll jump to the takeaway points here. She says that these creative so-called CDL experiences, like the project I did, and sounds like a pretty good project. She didn't go into really great detail about how this project, how she laid this out, like some of the other articles that we read. Something to do with the comics, right? But anyway, she says those kind of projects you design to help push back against marginalization and myopic literacy engagements can on the surface appear to be helpful. However, if we're not mindful of the alternative school contexts, these projects can essentially champion a narrow spectrum of literacy possibilities and practices for young people who have already historically been marginalized. So I wanted to stop here again, and I'm not sure I know you all have a range of contexts that you're teaching and learning in. Some of you might be in a writing center. Some of you are teaching at a high school or junior high level. I'm not sure if those are alternative schools or not. But I just wanted to give you a chance here to reflect on whatever your context or contexts are. And have you met this same kind of experience here? You have good intentions, you want to do more, but you're constrained by the context. I just wanted to get your take on this and get you to reflect a little bit on it. Okay, I wanted to wrap up here with this beautiful quotation from Green. This is basically some manifesto. And I was really struck by it, as I'm sure you were as well. And so I thought this would be good to kind of zero in on these points. And I've broken this up into 3 pieces. So to see things or people small, one chooses to see from a detached point of view, to watch behaviors from the perspective of a system, to be concerned with trends and tendencies rather than the intentionality and concreteness of everyday life. So that's thinking small, and I'm sure we've all been guilty of this. So I don't want to just point fingers at, at administrators or whatever. But to see things or people big, one must resist viewing other human beings as mere objects or chess pieces and view them in their integrity and particularity instead. Something like Immanuel Kant would say. One must see from the point of view of the participant in the midst of what is happening. If one is to be privy to the plans people make, the initiatives they take, the uncertainties they face. And so again, good food for thought. And the next time you're complaining about some student that you feel like is not holding up their end of the bargain, if you will, I think it's useful to come back to this point, right? Are you thinking small or thinking big? And then finally, when applied to schooling, the vision that sees things big brings us in close contact with the details and with the particularities that cannot be reduced to statistics or even to the measurable. Now, all this really sounds to me like something Rancière and Jacques or Freire would heartily agree with. But I want to get your take on this manifesto. Is this something that you are moved by? Do you find it problematic? And let me know your thoughts. And I think that'll do it for this piece. I appreciate you listening and hope to see you again very soon.